Ancient highways once connected continents long before maps existed. This video explores the incredible migration routes that linked the first intercontinental civilizations, revealing how these paths of human movement formed the original global network. By the end, you will understand the invisible threads that still bind our modern world, explaining why cultures separated by oceans share such deep similarities. How did the horse transform the Eurasian steppe into a superhighway, and what drove people to cross a frozen bridge into an unknown continent? What forgotten journey in your own family history might connect to these epic voyages of long ago? Our story begins not with grand empires, but with footprints in the mud. For tens of thousands of years, the only highways were game trails, and the only compass was the sun. Small family groups moved with a rhythm dictated by nature, following migrating herds to new grazing grounds or tracking seasonal plants as they ripened. It was a life of profound connection to the immediate environment, yet one that also planted the seeds for something much larger. This initial, intimate scale of movement was the training ground for the epic journeys to come. What would compel these communities, so finely attuned to a specific valley or coastline, to pack their few belongings and walk into the absolute unknown? The answer is woven from several strands, each a powerful force in the human story. Shifts in climate opened new corridors of ice-free land and closed off old ones, gently but insistently pushing populations in new directions. Over generations, even a modest increase in the number of people could strain local resources, creating a quiet pressure to find new spaces. And then there is the factor we cannot overlook, the spark that turns pressure into adventure, a deep-seated curiosity about what lies beyond the next river or mountain range. This wasn't just about fleeing hardship, it was about reaching for possibility. The evidence for this astonishing capacity is etched into the landscape itself, in places that force us to rewrite our own history. Take the site of Monteverde in southern Chile. Here, archaeologists uncovered the remnants of a small settlement with wooden frames, animal hides, and even preserved medicinal plants. What makes Monteverde a revelation is its age, reliably dated to around 14,500 years ago. This is profound because, according to the long-held model, humans should not have been that far south in the Americas for another 1,000 years or more. To reach that spot, people had to complete an unimaginable journey from Northeast Asia down the entire length of 2 continents, navigating glacial barriers, unknown predators, and completely unfamiliar ecosystems. They did it, and they did it earlier and faster than we ever thought possible. This single site shatters the slow, cautious timeline we once imagined. It tells us that our ancestors were not merely surviving their migrations, they were mastering them. They carried with them not just tools and fire, but a sophisticated knowledge of ecology, an ability to read the land, and a resilient social fabric that could withstand the strain of years on the move. Long before the first city wall was built or the first king was crowned, humanity had already proven it could cross the world. This foundational era of movement, driven by a mix of necessity and boldness, established the deepest patterns. It created the first human map of the planet, a map written in memory, myth, and the very paths their children would walk. These earliest routes became the templates, the ancestral roads that later, more complex civilizations would eventually find, widen, and link together into something new. Monteverde forces us to rethink the very meaning of a continent. For us, a continent is a colored shape on a map, a fixed political and geographical entity. But for the people who first walked its length, it was none of those things. It was a continuous story, written river by river, mountain pass by mountain pass. So when we talk about the first intercontinental civilizations, we must shed our modern definitions. In the ancient world, intercontinental did not mean crossing a line on a page. It meant successfully bridging entire worlds of difference. It meant traversing a barrier so vast and formidable that the cultures on either side had developed in profound isolation from one another, creating entirely separate libraries of knowledge, technology, and belief. These were not neighboring villages trading pottery. These were different human experiments meeting for the very first time. The true barriers were not just miles of land, but radical shifts in reality. Imagine the perspective of an early group moving from the grassy savannas of Northeast Africa into the dense, humid rainforests of Central Africa. The animals, the plants, the very air and diseases were alien. Or consider the psychological wall of the Sahara, an ocean of sand and heat that for millennia severed sub-Saharan Africa from the Mediterranean world. To cross it was to venture into a realm that seemed actively hostile to life. The ultimate barrier, however, may have been the one that was not a barrier at all, but a bridge. The Bering Land Bridge, known as Beringia, was a vast, cold plain connecting Siberia to Alaska during the Ice Ages. For the people who crossed it, it wasn't a dramatic leap between continents. It was simply following the herds into a new hunting ground, one season after another, over generations. They had no idea they were leaving one continent for another because the concept didn't exist. They were just walking forward into their future. The intercontinental link was only created in hindsight when their descendants, thousands of years later and thousands of miles to the south, established cultures so distinct from their Asian origins that the magnitude of the original journey became clear. This is the scale we are dealing with. An intercontinental route was more than a trail. It was a sustained thread of knowledge and contact that managed to survive these formidable filters of geography and culture. It was a line of communication that remained open long enough for ideas to travel back and forth, for crops to be exchanged, for languages to borrow words, and for technologies to hybridize. When a strain of wheat from the Fertile Crescent finally took root in the fields of Europe, or when the secrets of bronze making pulsed along the steppe highways from Siberia to Scandinavia, that was the intercontinental network in action. It was slow, fragile, and operated on timescales we can barely comprehend, often taking centuries for a single innovation to complete its journey. But once established, these routes became the arteries of the ancient world, carrying not just goods, but the very ingredients of civilization itself. They turned isolated sparks of human genius into a connected fire. So the question becomes, who were the first people to not just cross these impossible divides, but to turn the crossing into a highway? That endless sea of grass was not a barrier, but a bridge. The Eurasian Steppe, a vast corridor of open land stretching from the borders of Europe to the edges of China, functioned as the ancient world's ultimate superhighway. Its influence is so profound that we can still trace its echoes in the languages we speak and the technologies that shaped history. This was not a route for the slow migration of families on foot. This was a dynamic, high-speed network that operated on horseback. The key that unlocked this landscape was a single, transformative partnership, the domestication of the horse. Once humans learned to ride, the scale of everything changed. Distances that would take a trading caravan months to walk could be covered by a mounted messenger in weeks. The steppe became a fluid space, a conveyor belt for people, ideas, and innovations moving at a pace the sedentary world could scarcely comprehend. The most powerful evidence of this highway's traffic is not buried treasure, but something carried in the human mind, language itself. Scholars trace the sprawling family of Indo-European languages, which includes English, Spanish, Hindi, Persian, and Russian, back to a common ancestral tongue. And the most compelling theory places the origin of that language among the pastoral communities of the Pontic-Caspian steppe, north of the Black Sea. From this heartland, the linguistic map suggests a series of extraordinary journeys, waves of steppe peoples, likely beginning around 5,000 years ago, moved outward in several directions. Some went west into Europe, their speech evolving into Celtic, Germanic, and Italic branches. Others went south into Anatolia and the Middle East. Still others made the longest trek of all, southeast through Central Asia and over the mountain passes into the Indian subcontinent. This was not a military conquest in the traditional sense, but a gradual, pervasive cultural diffusion powered by mobility. The people who carried these languages did not travel empty-handed. They brought a package of revolutionary technologies, with the chariot being the most dramatic. Imagine the impact of this invention arriving in the ancient Near East or the plains of India. The chariot was more than transportation. It was the ultimate prestige technology and a devastating military platform. Light, fast, and drawn by horses, it required specialized knowledge to build, maintain, and drive. That knowledge spread along the steppe routes, transforming warfare and royalty from Egypt to China. Alongside the chariot came advanced metallurgical skills, particularly in bronze working and later iron. The steppe corridor acted as a long-distance workshop, transmitting improved smelting techniques and distinctive styles of metalwork, from decorative horse gear to sophisticated weaponry. This flow of ideas created a surprising cultural unity across immense distances. A nobleman in Sweden might be buried with a ceremonial wagon that bears a striking resemblance to artifacts found in the Caucasus Mountains, while myths about sky gods and heroic horse tamers echo from the Vedas of India to the sagas of Scandinavia. The steppe did not just connect places, it connected storylines. The true genius of this system was its simplicity. The highway itself required no engineers, no paving stones, no maintenance crews. It was maintained by the hoofprints of horses and the cyclical movements of nomadic herds. It was a network built on adaptability, where the same skills that allowed a community to survive the harsh winters also enabled them to traverse a continent. This grass-roofed corridor demonstrates a fundamental truth, that sometimes the most powerful connections are not made by building great walls, but by mastering the open space between them. The steppe highway reminds us that civilization was not built by cities alone, but also by the restless riders who moved between them, weaving a tapestry of exchange that pulled the ancient world closer together. While the steppe riders mastered the land, another civilization was learning to read the sky over the open sea. Their story begins not on a continent, but on the edge of the world's greatest ocean, facing a horizon that held no visible promise of land. This was the domain of the Lapita people, and their achievement stands as one of humanity's most audacious acts of exploration. Starting from the islands of Near Oceania, around 3,200 years ago, they embarked on a purposeful voyage into the unknown vastness of the Pacific, a realm so empty it is called remote Oceania. Their vehicle was not the horse but the outrigger canoe, a masterpiece of maritime engineering. These were not simple rafts but sophisticated vessels capable of carrying families, supplies, and the very foundations of a new life across hundreds of miles of open water. Their navigation system was a living library of environmental knowledge. They read the subtle patterns of swells as they reflected off distant islands. They memorized the flight paths of homing birds. They tracked the positions of specific stars rising and setting on the horizon, creating a celestial map that guided them across a featureless blue desert. This was not accidental drift, it was deliberate, skilled colonization. We know the path of their journey because they left a clear signature in the clay, their distinctive pottery. Lapita pottery is instantly recognizable, decorated with intricate geometric patterns stamped into the clay with delicate toothed tools. As archaeologists trace this pottery style across the Pacific, from the Bismarck Archipelago out to Samoa and Tonga, they are literally mapping the family route of a civilization. Each new island settlement, with its telltale pottery shards, is like a breadcrumb trail across an ocean, marking where these incredible voyagers stopped, settled, and then launched again for the next horizon. But they did not travel light. Understanding that the islands they found might lack crucial resources, the Lapita carried a complete survival kit, what scholars call a transported landscape. In their canoes were the seedlings of staple crops like taro, yams, and breadfruit. They brought domesticated animals including pigs, chickens, and dogs. They were not just discovering new lands, they were bringing the old world with them to create a new one. This package of plants and animals was as vital as their navigational skills, ensuring their communities could thrive in isolation. Think of the courage this required. A steppe rider could always see the next valley, could follow a river, could track the herds. For a Lapita navigator, once the site of their home island vanished below the horizon, they were committed to a journey with no guaranteed end, guided only by stars, waves, and an unwavering belief in their own knowledge. Their expansion across the Pacific was the slow, deliberate peopling of the last major region on Earth. It connected islands separated by oceanic voids into a vast, culturally linked network, a kind of maritime version of the steppe highway, but across a far more formidable medium. The legacy of the Lapita is not written in grand monuments, but in the very existence of the Pacific island cultures that followed. Their story is the ultimate testament to a different kind of intercontinental connection, one built not on following the land, but on mastering the sea itself, proving that human curiosity and ingenuity could bridge even the greatest divides on our planet. A desert can be a door just as easily as a wall. The Sahara, that vast ocean of sand we see today, has not always been an impassable barrier. For long periods in the deep past, climatic shifts transformed it into a green and welcoming corridor, a dynamic artery that pulsed with life and movement. This is the story of how the world's greatest desert became one of history's most surprising bridges, linking the civilizations of the Mediterranean coast with the rich, vibrant kingdoms rising far to the south. When the rains returned to North Africa, the desert bloomed. What are now endless dunes became savannas dotted with lakes and crisscrossed by flowing rivers. This was not a permanent change but a cyclical one, opening windows of opportunity that could last for centuries. During these green phases, the Sahara was not empty. It was inhabited by communities who adapted brilliantly to its changing moods. The most remarkable of these were the Garamantes, a people who established a powerful kingdom in what is now modern Libya, in the heart of the desert itself. Their survival was an act of sheer ingenuity. They mastered the art of tapping into ancient fossil water trapped deep beneath the sand, constructing vast underground irrigation channels known as fagaras. These tunnels, sometimes stretching for miles, brought water to the surface to create oasis cities and fertile fields in the midst of the arid landscape. The Garamantes were not just surviving, they were thriving, and they became the essential middlemen of a trans-Saharan network. They controlled the routes that connected two different worlds. From the south, from the forested regions and river valleys of West Africa, came legendary wealth, gold dust, precious ivory, and exotic animals. From the north, from the Phoenician, Roman, and later Arab worlds, came manufactured goods, textiles, glass, and salt, a mineral as valuable as gold in the tropical south for preserving food. This was more than a simple trade in objects. The caravans that plied these routes, guided by the stars and an intimate knowledge of the desert's hidden waterholes, carried something far more precious: ideas. Along with bolts of cloth and bags of salt came new technologies, religious beliefs, and systems of writing. The movement of people was constant, from merchants and scholars to entire communities relocating along these green highways. The Sahara, in its wet phases, acted as a cultural blender where influences from the Nile Valley, the Mediterranean coast, and the Niger River basin slowly intermingled. Then the climate would shift again. The lakes would dry up, the rivers would vanish, and the desert would reclaim its territory. The broad, green corridors would narrow to a few tenuous tracks, the domain of only the most specialized traders and guides. The door between continents would swing nearly shut, isolating the civilizations on either side for centuries at a time. This cyclical pattern reveals a profound truth about our ancient networks. The routes that linked the first intercontinental civilizations were not fixed lines on a map. They were living, breathing phenomena, deeply entwined with the heartbeat of the planet itself. A change in rainfall patterns could open a new highway or erase an old one, determining which cultures would meet and which would remain mysteries to each other. The story of the Saharan artery teaches us that connection was never guaranteed. It was a fragile achievement won through adaptation and lost to the turning of the climatic clock. It asks us to consider what other doors, now closed by ice or sand, once stood open, allowing the flow of people and ideas that shaped the foundations of our world. The courage to cross an ocean pales before the patience to walk across a world. While the Lapita Voyagers navigated by stars, another epic journey was unfolding under a different kind of guidance, the slow, relentless rhythm of an ice age. This story takes us to the far north, to a place that no longer exists as it once did, a lost continent now submerged beneath the Bering Sea. During the last great glacial period, so much of the world's water was locked up in massive ice sheets that global sea levels plummeted, exposing a breathtaking landscape. This was Beringia, a vast, cold plain sometimes over 1,000 miles wide, connecting what is now Siberia to Alaska. It was not a narrow bridge, but a continent in its own right, a frigid grassland teeming with life, from mammoths and steppe bison to the humans who followed them. For generations, the traditional narrative was clear and compelling. It was called the Clovis First Theory. It proposed that around 13,000 years ago, as the ice sheets began to retreat, a corridor opened between two massive glaciers covering Canada. Through this inland passage, a distinct culture of highly skilled hunters, identified by their elegant, fluted spear points, entered the heart of the continent. They spread with astonishing speed, reaching the tip of South America within a mere 1,000 years. This theory painted a picture of a rapid, purposeful blitzkrieg of a new world. But science, like the people it studies, is always on the move. In recent decades, a series of archaeological discoveries have quietly dismantled this tidy story, pushing the timeline of human arrival in the Americas far deeper into the past. Sites like Cooper's Ferry, nestled along a river in Idaho, have yielded stone tools and other evidence reliably dated to over 16,000 years ago. That is a full 3,000 years before the Clovis culture is thought to have emerged. At Monteverde in Chile, as we discussed earlier, evidence of human habitation dates to around 14,500 years ago. These pre-Clovis sites are like stubborn facts that refuse to fit the old map. They tell us that people were already deep into the continents long before the famous ice-free corridor had even opened. So how did they get there? This puzzle has given rise to the coastal migration hypothesis, a theory as elegant as it is daunting. Imagine not an inland trek but a maritime journey. Proponents suggest that some groups possessing basic boat technology could have moved eastward from Beringia not by land but by skirting the coastline. They would have navigated a labyrinth of islands and inlets along the Pacific Rim, a region that, due to lower sea levels, offered a much richer and ice-free coastline than exists today. This kelp highway, as some researchers call it, would have provided a consistent marine ecosystem rich in resources, from fish and shellfish to sea mammals, offering a reliable food source for a traveling community. This coastal route would have allowed for a much earlier entry into the Americas, bypassing the impassable continental ice sheets altogether. Whether by land or by sea, or more likely by a combination of both routes over many centuries, the crossing of Beringia was the ultimate one-way journey. Once the world warmed and the seas rose again, flooding the Great Plain, the bridge vanished behind them. There was no going back. The groups that made this crossing carried with them the genetic and cultural seeds for all the diversity to come. From the mighty city builders of Mesoamerica to the complex mound societies of the Mississippi, from the buffalo hunters of the Great Plains to the ingenious cultures of the Andes and the Amazon, every single one of those threads traces back to those first families who looked out from Asia, saw herds moving onto a new plain, and decided to follow. Their story is not one of a single migration, but of many pulses over thousands of years, a slow filling of two empty continents. It stands as the most profound demographic expansion in human history, a testament to resilience and adaptation that forever changed the face of our world. A name, Meluhha, echoes from broken clay tablets in the desert to the scribes of ancient Mesopotamia, writing their inventories and letters in the wedge-shaped script called cuneiform. Meluhha was a distant, almost mythical source of fabulous wealth. For a long time, scholars puzzled over its location, a land that exported ivory, exquisite carnelian beads, and exotic woods. Today, the consensus is clear: Meluhha was the Indus Valley civilization. This revelation means that over 4,000 years ago, two of the world's first great urban societies, separated by nearly 2,000 miles of mountains and sea, were not just aware of each other, they were actively trading partners. Their connection forms one of history's earliest and most sophisticated intercontinental networks, a web of exchange spun across the Persian Gulf. The geography itself suggested a route. Between the river plains of the Indus and the twin rivers of the Tigris and Euphrates lay two formidable paths. One was the overland trek across the Iranian plateau, a harsh journey through mountain passes and arid stretches. The other, far more efficient for bulk goods, was the sea. The Persian Gulf acted not as a barrier but as a liquid highway, with the island of Dilmun, modern Bahrain, serving as the crucial hub in the middle. Think of Dilmun not as a final destination, but as a thriving ancient free port, a neutral ground where merchants from Mesopotamia and sailors from the Indus could meet, negotiate, and exchange cargoes without venturing into each other's homelands. Archaeological digs on Bahrain reveal a society grown wealthy from this trade, with graves containing Indus-style seals and Mesopotamian pottery side by side. The cargo that moved along this route tells a story of specialized economies reaching out to one another. From the Indus region came goods that were rare or impossible to find in Mesopotamia. There was lapis lazuli, that stunning deep blue stone, which was mined only in far-off Afghanistan, but was expertly worked and traded by Indus merchants. It was highly prized in Sumer for royal jewelry and religious artifacts. There was carnelian, a beautiful reddish gemstone, which Indus craftsmen drilled and polished into long, elegant beads with a technical skill unmatched elsewhere. Timber, likely teak from the Indus region's forests, was shipped to tree-starved Mesopotamia for construction. They also traded in luxury textiles and, perhaps most intriguingly, small, square seals made of steatite. These seals, carved with images of animals and a still undeciphered script, were used by Indus merchants to mark their bales of goods, a signature of authenticity that traveled all the way to Mesopotamian cities. What did the Indus receive in return? The cuneiform records from Mesopotamia speak of sending out silver, tin, woolen textiles, and oils. This was more than a simple barter of trinkets, it was an economic symbiosis. Mesopotamia, with its powerful city-states and temple economies, provided a massive market for luxuries that demonstrated status and divine favor. The Indus civilization, with its remarkably organized cities like Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, provided the manufacturing expertise and the trade networks to deliver those desirables. They did not need to conquer each other, they needed each other's products. This relationship highlights a profound early truth. civilization could be fueled by connection as much as by conquest. The absence of evidence for large-scale warfare or domination between these cultures makes this network even more remarkable. We find Indus seals in Mesopotamian cities and Mesopotamian cylinder seals in the Indus region, but we do not find evidence of Indus armies on the Euphrates or Mesopotamian palaces on the Indus. This suggests a relationship built primarily on commerce and mutual benefit, a recognition that prosperity could flow along routes of exchange. It was a quiet, persistent dialogue between two different worldviews, conducted not with diplomats but with merchants and sailors. When the Indus Valley civilization eventually entered a period of decline and its cities were gradually abandoned, the mentions of Meluhha in Mesopotamian records also fade away. The network fell silent, reminding us that these ancient global links were fragile, dependent on the stability and productivity of the civilizations that sustained them. Yet for centuries, this connection thrived, proving that even at the dawn of urban life, humanity understood that no civilization, no matter how brilliant, is an island. Centuries before silk became the ultimate luxury, other treasures were already whispering across the continents. The story of the Silk Road does not begin with the Han Dynasty or with camel caravans, but in the deep shadows of the Bronze Age, along pathways worn smooth by the trade of a different kind of stone. Jade, specifically the exquisite green nephrite mined in the remote riverbeds of the Kunlun Mountains, was the first great commodity to link East and West. This stone, harder than steel, was revered in ancient China for its beauty and its spiritual significance, believed to connect the earthly and celestial realms. To acquire it, networks had to stretch thousands of miles into the heart of Central Asia, into the very territory that would later become the Silk Road's central artery. But jade was not traveling alone. From the mountains of Afghanistan came another vital resource, tin. When combined with copper, tin creates bronze, the metal that defined an age. The demand for this alloy, essential for weapons, tools, and ceremonial objects, created a pulsating trade network that connected the cities of Mesopotamia and the Indus Valley with sources far to the east. These were not yet organized, state-sponsored routes, but chains of contact, hand to hand and oasis to oasis, where luxury goods, technologies, and raw materials moved to meet the desires of emerging elites. The people who facilitated this early exchange remain largely nameless in history, but they left behind clues that continue to astonish us. In the arid Tarim basin of what is now Western China, the extremely dry climate has preserved a series of remarkable individuals. Known as the Tarim mummies, these ancient people were buried with finely woven textiles, felt hats, and baskets of food. What stops every observer is their appearance. Many have light hair, round eyes, and facial features that look distinctly European. Scientific analysis of their remains confirms they were not recent arrivals, but people who lived in the region as early as 4,000 years ago. Their very presence in the heart of Asia, wearing plaid twill cloth that resembles later Celtic designs, is a silent testament to the incredible distances people and their cultural traditions were moving during this formative period. They are not necessarily travelers from Rome or Greece, but likely early descendants of steppe populations whose lineages stretched back toward the west. Their existence shatters any simple notion of ancient cultures developing in isolation. Here, at a crossroads far from any ocean, we find a tapestry of humanity already woven from distant threads. These early networks created the essential template. They mapped out the viable passes through the towering Pamir Mountains. They identified the reliable oases in the terrifying Taklamakan Desert, whose name famously translates to "you go in, you don't come out." They established the protocols of trade, the systems of trust and barter between nomadic herders and settled oasis dwellers. The later Silk Road did not invent this geography of connection. It simply inherited it, scaled it up, and added a powerful new commodity to the mix. This reveals a profound and timeless driver. Long before empires sought to control the flow of silk for political prestige, individuals and small communities were motivated by a powerful combination of curiosity and the desire for the rare and the beautiful. The Bronze Age precursor was a network built on aspiration, proving that the human impulse to reach for distant, exquisite things is one of the oldest forces shaping our interconnected world. The most compelling evidence for contact might be growing in a garden. The sweet potato, a staple crop native to South America, carries a name across the ocean that is impossible to ignore. In the Quechua language of the Andes, it is called kumara. In Polynesia, from New Zealand to Hawaii, the same vegetable is known by the strikingly similar name kumara. This linguistic echo, floating across thousands of miles of open Pacific, is a puzzle that has captivated researchers for generations. Could it be a coincidence preserved over centuries, or is it a fossilized word, a tiny piece of proof that people from these distant shores once met? This question sits at the heart of one of history's most intriguing debates, the possibility of pre-Columbian trans-oceanic contact. We are not talking about the well-documented voyages of Vikings to Newfoundland, but about potential connections far earlier and more surprising, links that would rewrite our understanding of ancient isolation. On one side of this discussion are extraordinary claims, like the idea that the massive stone heads created by the Olmec civilization in Mexico, with their broad features and full lips, represent visitors from Africa. Most mainstream archaeologists see these magnificent sculptures as powerful representations of local Olmec rulers, shaped by the artistic styles and physical diversity present in ancient Mesoamerica itself. They argue that seeing them as portraits of foreigners imposes a modern perspective on a deeply local tradition. Yet other pieces of evidence invite more serious consideration. The presence of the bottle gourd, a plant useful as a container, in both Africa and the Americas long before Columbus has been sighted, though its seeds could have floated across the Atlantic. Then there is the chicken. For a time, chicken bones found at an archaeological site in Chile appeared to show a genetic link to Polynesian fowl, suggesting the birds, and therefore perhaps the people who carried them, had made the crossing. Later, more thorough studies cast doubt on those specific bones, but the question itself remains alive in academic circles. The key is to separate fringe speculation from credible, ongoing investigation. Respected scholars are not chasing lost tribes or sunken continents. Instead, they are carefully weighing complex data, from computer simulations of ancient voyaging canoes to the spread of specific parasites that may have hitched a ride with human hosts. The sweet potato remains the strongest thread. Recent genetic studies confirm that the Polynesian varieties are indeed South American in origin, and their arrival in the Pacific seems to predate European contact by several centuries. How did it get there? The simplest explanation is that Polynesian navigators, the descendants of the Lapita with their incredible seafaring prowess, reached the coast of South America. After all, we know they found every habitable island in the Pacific, a feat that required sailing east into the open ocean for weeks. Reaching South America would have been the ultimate extension of that exploratory drive. They may have traded with local communities, taken the valuable tuber on board, and carried it back across the sea, along with its name. This would not have been a colonizing mission, but a moment of contact, an exchange between two great seafaring traditions before they parted ways again, leaving only a word and a root vegetable as a clue. This debate matters because it challenges a static view of history. For a long time, the narrative presented the continents as isolated bubbles until 1492. But human curiosity and capability have always pushed against boundaries. To suggest a Polynesian canoe might have landed in South America is not to diminish the achievements of either culture, but to recognize a shared boldness. It reminds us that the map of ancient human connection is still being drawn, and that the oceans which we see as barriers were for the most skilled navigators just another kind of highway, vast and challenging, but not necessarily impassable. The story of our species is not a series of separate experiments, but a web of faint, tenuous threads, some of which we are only now beginning to see. A shift in the wind could rewrite the destiny of empires. While human ambition and curiosity drove exploration, the most powerful force directing the flow of peoples was often one they could not control: the climate itself. It was not a passive stage, but a dynamic, sometimes ruthless director of the human story, opening doors and slamming them shut with planetary indifference. To understand the migration routes that linked civilizations, we must listen to the whispers in ancient tree rings and the chemistry of deep sea cores, for they record the moments when the weather itself became history. One such moment echoes across 4,200 years. Around that time, a profound and prolonged drought gripped vast regions of the planet, an event geologists call the 4.2 kiloyear aridification. Its impact was catastrophic for some of the world's first complex societies. In Egypt, the Nile's annual flood, the lifeblood of the kingdom, failed with terrifying consistency. The resulting famine and social chaos are etched in hieroglyphs, contributing to the collapse of the pyramid-building Old Kingdom. At the same time, far to the northeast, the mighty Akkadian Empire in Mesopotamia, which had unified the city-states of Sumer, also crumbled. Ancient tablets lament that salt blew through the streets and that no crops would grow. The great king could not command the rains to fall. What followed these collapses was not merely a dark age, but a great scattering. When the center cannot hold, people move. Farmers, artisans, scribes, and soldiers, their old way of life unsustainable, would have packed what they could and walked away from the decaying cities. They carried with them the seeds of their knowledge, bronze smithing techniques, administrative practices, religious ideas, and agricultural skills. These refugees of climate disaster did not vanish, they dispersed, becoming vectors of cultural transmission. They likely integrated into other societies on the periphery, bringing new technologies and perspectives, or they formed new, hybrid communities in previously marginal lands. This diaspora, forced by a changing sky, became an unintended engine of connection, spreading the components of civilization farther and wider than peaceful trade alone might have done. Conversely, a warming world could open pathways that had been sealed for millennia. The end of the last glacial maximum, a period of intense cold that peaked around 20,000 years ago, did not just make the planet more comfortable, it redrew the map of the possible. As the massive continental ice sheets began their slow retreat, they revealed new lands. In Europe, the melting ice opened corridors from southern refuges into the vast, empty forests of the north, allowing hunter-gatherer groups to follow the reindeer and reclaim a continent. But the most dramatic opening was in the far north, the land bridge of Beringia. While it existed during the glacial peak, the southern corridors into the heart of the Americas were blocked by impassable ice walls. The warming climate acted as a slow-motion key, first melting a coastal route along the Pacific, and later, as the ice sheets pulled apart, creating an inland passageway between them. This was not an event, but a process lasting centuries, a gradually widening invitation into a new world. The people who walked through were not fleeing a sudden catastrophe, but responding to a slow, generational opportunity, following game into emerging ecosystems. This reveals the dual nature of climate as a migration driver. It could be a sudden, violent push like the drought that shattered empires, forcing desperate movement. Or it could be a patient, gentle pull, a thawing of possibilities that lured communities forward into virgin territory over countless generations. In both cases, the agency of human beings was framed and often overruled by the planet's own rhythms. Their great journeys, which we now study as the foundations of our world, were frequently less about choice and more about profound necessity. a negotiation with an environment that held all the cards. This perspective humbles our narratives of conquest and discovery. It suggests that the very distribution of humanity, the languages we speak, and the cultures that formed, may bear the indelible fingerprint of ancient droughts and long-melted glaciers, reminding us that we have always been passengers on a much larger, ever-changing Earth. A bronze axe is more than a tool, it is a thought given physical form. The most profound cargo carried along ancient migration routes was not silk or gold, but something weightless and invisible, a current of ideas that could reshape entire worldviews. These were not single items traded at an oasis, but complex cultural packages, bundles of knowledge, belief, and practice that traveled together, often carried by the very people migrating along these highways. When a family group moved, they brought their gods with them. When a skilled artisan resettled, he brought his recipes for alloys. When a community adopted a new way of building, they were also adopting a new way of seeing their place in the universe. This intangible transmission is the true legacy of our interconnected past, the software that ran on the hardware of trade routes and migration trails. Consider the pyramid, a shape that haunts the human imagination. We find massive pyramidal structures in the sands of Egypt, the ziggurats of Mesopotamia, and the jungle temples of the Maya and Aztec. For a long time, this similarity fueled wild theories of lost continents or ancient astronauts. The more grounded explanation is far more interesting. It is a story of convergent innovation where different cultures, facing similar human needs and limitations, arrived at a similar architectural solution. The need to build something tall and imposing, to reach toward the heavens, to create a stable, monumental structure from stone or earth, logically leads to a broad base and a narrowing top. The pyramid is a shape that gravity itself helps to design. In Egypt, it was a tomb, a machine for resurrection. In Mesopotamia, the ziggurat was a holy mountain, a stairway for priests to commune with the gods. In Mesoamerica, the pyramid temple was a sacred stage for ritual, aligning with the movements of the stars. They are not copies, but independent answers to a shared human question. How do we physically manifest our relationship with the divine and the cosmic? This suggests a profound unity in human aspiration, a kind of psychic thread connecting civilizations that never met. Other transmissions, however, show a clearer line of travel from a single source. The spread of bronze metallurgy is a perfect example of a technological package that revolutionized the ancient world. The knowledge of smelting copper and alloying it with tin to create a stronger, more versatile metal did not spontaneously ignite in multiple places. It appears to have originated in the Near East, in the region of Anatolia or the Caucasus, around 5,000 years ago. From that single hearth, the technology pulsed outward like a wave, following the very migration and trade routes we have been exploring. It moved into Europe, where it transformed warfare and agriculture. It traveled east across the Steppe Highway, reaching China, where local artisans adapted it into their own magnificent ritual vessels. This was not just the trade of finished bronze goods. It was the transfer of an entire system of knowledge, the understanding of ore, the design of furnaces, the techniques of casting, and the social organization required to control such a valuable and complex craft. A bronze sword arriving in a new land was impressive, but the local smith who learned to make one was transformative. He became a node in a global network of innovation. Writing systems, too, traveled along these cognitive highways, though often with fascinating adaptation. The concept of representing language with symbols seems to have emerged independently in a few key places, like Mesopotamia, China, and Mesoamerica. But the idea of an alphabet where symbols represent sounds rather than whole words or concepts appears to have a single, storied journey. It evolved from Egyptian hieroglyphs through Semitic scripts to the Phoenician alphabet. This efficient system was then carried across the Mediterranean by Phoenician traders. The Greeks adopted it, adding vowels. The Romans later adapted the Greek version, and their Latin alphabet became the script of an empire, eventually giving us the letters you are reading now. Each culture did not simply copy, they reinvented, molding the tool to fit the unique sounds and needs of their own language. The route carried the seed of the idea, but local minds provided the soil for it to grow in new and unexpected ways. Perhaps the most subtle yet universal package was astronomical knowledge. The movement of the sun, moon, and stars was a clock, a calendar, and a scripture written in the sky for every ancient culture. Observational knowledge of solstices, equinoxes, and planetary cycles was critical for agriculture, for ritual, and for power. This knowledge was so essential that it formed a core part of the cultural software carried by migrating groups. We see its transfer in the alignment of monuments. The basic understanding that the sun rises at a different point on the horizon throughout the year appears in stone circles in Britain, in the orientation of Egyptian temples, and in the precise windows of Maya observatories. While the specific myths attached to the constellations differed wildly, the underlying data, the mapping of celestial patterns, was a kind of international currency of knowledge, passed down through generations and across continents, refined by each culture that looked up and wondered. These routes carried not just spices and swords, but the very frameworks for understanding time, space, and humanity's place within it. The connections were invisible, but their imprint on the world we inherited is everywhere we choose to look. Our deepest history is written not in stone, but in the very code of life itself. Modern genetics has given us a new kind of time machine, one that reads the story of our species from the blueprint we all carry. By analyzing the DNA of both ancient remains and living populations, scientists can now trace the faint, ghostly outlines of migrations that left no written records, confirming some of our theories while completely rewriting others. This genetic storytelling adds a powerful, personal layer to the maps we have been drawing, revealing connections between peoples separated by continents and centuries. It shows us that the great movements we discuss were not abstract historical forces, but the collective journeys of countless individual families, whose legacy we still carry within us. One of the most dramatic revelations from this new science centers on the people of the Eurasian Steppe, specifically a culture known as the Yamnaya. Archaeology told us they were mobile pastoralists, masters of the horse and wagon who spread out from their homeland north of the Black Sea around 5,000 years ago. But genetics has revealed the stunning scale of their impact. Studies of ancient European bones show a striking genetic shift occurring precisely during this period. In many regions, a significant portion of the local ancestry was replaced by DNA originating from the Yamnaya and related steppe groups. This was not a subtle blending, but a major demographic wave. It provides concrete, biological evidence for the massive migration suggested by the spread of Indo-European languages and bronze technology. The descendants of these steppe herders, it seems, became the ancestors of much of modern Europe, their genetic signature carried forward through thousands of years. This finding transformed the steppe from a theoretical highway into a documented river of people. Across the world, genetics has also provided definitive proof for one of humanity's greatest journeys, the peopling of the Americas. The DNA of indigenous populations from North and South America shows an unambiguous and deep-rooted connection to populations in Siberia, particularly in a group known as the Ancient North Siberians. The genetic data indicates that the ancestors of all Native Americans diverged from these Siberian groups in a single, foundational migration event, likely crossing the Bering Land Bridge. Later, the data shows this founding population itself split, with one branch moving south to populate the entire continents and another remaining in the north. This genetic map perfectly corroborates the archaeological timeline of early sites like Cooper's Ferry and Monteverde, providing a biological clock that ticks in harmony with the artifacts in the ground. It confirms that the story of the Americas begins with that epic crossing from Asia, a story now etched in the genes of millions. Sometimes, however, genetics does not simply confirm, it complicates in fascinating ways. It reveals layers of history that archaeology alone cannot see. Take the case of the United Kingdom. For a long time, the narrative held that the builders of Stonehenge, a farming people, were largely replaced by later Bronze Age invaders. Genetic studies, however, tell a more nuanced tale. While the arrival of the Bell Beaker culture, linked to those steppe migrations, did introduce new ancestry, it shows that the earlier Neolithic farming population was not wiped out. Instead, their genetic lineage persisted, simply mixing with the newcomers. The modern British genome is a palimpsest, a living document where the bloodlines of ancient hunter-gatherers, early farmers, and Bronze Age arrivals are all still present, woven together. This shows us that migration was often a story of integration and mixture, not just displacement. The most poignant connections genetics reveals are the unexpected ones, the threads that tie seemingly isolated worlds together. In the islands of the South Pacific, the DNA of modern Polynesian people carries clear signals of contact with the indigenous populations of South America, a faint but measurable genetic exchange that occurred centuries before European ships arrived. This stunning finding offers powerful support for the idea that Polynesian voyagers did indeed reach the Americas, and that their contact was more than a fleeting encounter. It included the most intimate form of cultural exchange. Similarly, studies of ancient Egyptian mummies have revealed that their genetic makeup shows more affinity with Near Eastern populations than with modern Egyptians, highlighting how much human landscapes can shift over millennia. These genetic whispers remind us that the map of human ancestry is full of surprises, where a person living today might carry within them the legacy of a sailor from a distant ocean or a trader from a forgotten desert route. It makes the past feel present and the global story of migration a deeply personal one. The words we speak carry the echoes of ancient journeys. Language itself is a kind of living archaeology, a fossil record of human movement preserved not in stone but in sound and syntax. By comparing languages, scholars can reconstruct family trees, tracing a shared ancestral tongue back to a homeland, and then mapping the branches as they spread across the world. This method, called comparative linguistics, allows us to hear the footsteps of migrations long after the trails have grown cold. One of the most stunning successes of this approach is the story of the Austronesian language family. Today, Austronesian languages are spoken across a breathtaking span of the globe, from Madagascar off the coast of Africa, all the way to remote Easter Island in the Pacific. This distribution alone hints at an epic voyage. Linguistic detectives began by comparing basic vocabulary, words for things like numbers, body parts, and natural elements, across hundreds of these languages. They found consistent, systematic sound changes, like a code that revealed their common origin. The trail led them back to the island of Taiwan. From this single source, the linguistic map suggests a series of seaborne expansions that perfectly mirror the archaeological story of the Lapita people we discussed earlier. First, languages moved south into the Philippines and Indonesia. Then, the bold eastern push began, carried by those master navigators into the vast Pacific, hopping from island to island. Each new settlement became a linguistic branch, with the language slowly evolving in isolation. The word for sea or canoe in Hawaiian and Maori might sound different today, but their deep ancestral link is undeniable. This linguistic expansion is a direct echo of the pottery trail, proving that the Lapita migration was not just a movement of people, but of an entire world of words and meanings. On an even grander, more controversial scale, some linguists look at connections that span continents. They propose the existence of ancient macro families, language supergroups that would have been spoken in the deep past. The most famous of these is the Nostratic hypothesis. This theory suggests that several of the world's major language families, including Indo-European, Uralic, Altaic, and even Afro-Asiatic, which includes ancient Egyptian, all descend from a single, incredibly ancient common ancestor. Proponents point to shared roots for very basic concepts like personal pronouns or words for water or hand. The idea is that tens of thousands of years ago, a population speaking this Proto-Nostratic language began to disperse, and over immense stretches of time, their speech diverged into the seemingly unrelated families we see today. This hypothesis remains hotly debated. Critics argue that the similarities could be due to chance or to ancient borrowing between neighboring groups, not a common origin. Whether Nostratic is ultimately proven or not, the attempt itself is revealing. It represents a profound human urge to find unity in our diversity, to trace all our voices back to a single campfire somewhere in the distant past. Beyond mapping migrations, language also preserves the history of technology. The spread of a new invention often travels with its name. Take the word for wheel. Its roots in the Proto-Indo-European language, the ancestor of so many Eurasian tongues, are reconstructible. The fact that this root spread so widely with the technology tells a clear story. It wasn't that separate cultures invented the wheel and then coincidentally gave it similar names. It was that the people who knew about wheels and the word for them moved and brought both with them. Similarly, the distribution of words for boat or specific sailing terms can chart the course of maritime cultures. When we find related words for sweet potato in South America and Polynesia, it is a linguistic clue pointing directly across the Pacific. These words are like cultural seeds carried in the minds of migrants and taking root in new soil. By listening carefully to the echoes in our speech, we can hear the faint conversations of traders on the steppe, the chants of navigators under the stars, and the stories told around fires at the end of a long journey into a new world. A network that carries life can also carry its shadow. Alongside the precious metals and brilliant ideas, the ancient highways of migration conveyed invisible, unwelcome passengers. These were pathogens, microbes that traveled in the blood and breath of the people moving along these routes, forever altering the demographic landscape of the ancient world in ways we are only beginning to understand. This is the darker, unintended consequence of connection. A biological exchange that served as a haunting precursor to the far more devastating Columbian exchange that would come millennia later. While direct evidence for specific pandemics in deep antiquity is rare, we can infer their likely impact by observing the stark, tragic patterns from more recent history when isolated populations met. The principle is a simple, brutal one of immunology. When a disease circulates within a large, connected population over many generations, it often becomes endemic, meaning it is always present but typically less severe. The population builds up a degree of resistance, and many individuals encounter the illness in childhood, when its effects can be milder. But when that same disease is introduced to a population that has never encountered it before, one with no built-up immunological defenses, the results can be catastrophic. The illness acts like a wildfire in dry grass, spreading with terrifying speed and lethality. In the ancient world, the steady increase in connectivity created the perfect conditions for this kind of biological shock. Imagine a vibrant, isolated community in a fertile river valley, one that has thrived for centuries with little contact beyond its own mountains. Their society is complex, their culture rich. Then a small band of traders arrives from a distant civilization carrying new textiles and tools. Unknowingly, they also carry a mild childhood illness from their homeland. Within weeks of their departure, that illness explodes through the valley population. The local healers have no remedies for a sickness they have never seen. The social order crumbles as those who tend the sick fall ill themselves and fields go untended. What was a thriving town can be reduced to a shell within a single season, not by war but by fever. This is not mere speculation. We see echoes of this dynamic in the archaeological record, though interpreting it requires careful deduction. A settlement shows signs of rapid abandonment, with tools left in place and food stores untouched. There is no evidence of conflict, no weapons among the remains, no signs of violent destruction. The most plausible explanation often points to a sudden, overwhelming crisis, and epidemic disease is a prime candidate. The collapse of the large Neolithic settlement at Çatalhöyük in Anatolia, for instance, remains shrouded in mystery, but such a scenario is considered by some researchers. Later, in the more documented classical world, we get clearer examples. The plague of Athens in the 5th century before the Common Era, described by the historian Thucydides, devastated the city-state during its war with Sparta and likely entered through its busy port, a node in the Mediterranean network. Even more telling is the Antonine Plague of the 2nd century of the Common Era, which swept through the Roman Empire, brought back by troops returning from campaigns in the Near East. It killed millions, weakening the empire's economic and military fabric and contributing to the beginning of its long decline. These historical events show us the template, the mechanism by which interconnectedness could backfire with devastating force. For the earlier periods of mass migration, the effects would have been more diffuse but no less profound. As the Yamnaya people moved across Europe, or as Lapita voyagers settled new Pacific islands, they did not travel in sterile isolation. They carried their own suite of germs. In some cases, these may have given them an inadvertent advantage, as surrounding populations with no resistance succumbed. More broadly, the constant, low-level exchange of pathogens along trade routes like the Silk Road or the Saharan trails would have created a slow-motion blending of disease pools. This had a paradoxical effect. It was tragic for individual communities that faced sudden outbreaks, but over the very long term, it gradually built up immunities across the connected hemispheres of Africa and Eurasia. This created a profound and ultimately cruel epidemiological divide. For millennia, the civilizations of Africa and Eurasia, linked by land, exchanged microbes along with goods. They suffered plagues, but their populations developed genetic and acquired resistances. The civilizations of the Americas, however, had developed in almost complete biological isolation from this old-world disease pool. When sustained contact was finally established after 1492, the result was the greatest demographic catastrophe in human history, as diseases like smallpox, measles, and influenza raced ahead of the explorers, killing an estimated 90% of the indigenous population in some regions. This later catastrophe helps us look back and understand the smaller scale, ancient versions that must have occurred whenever a major new bridge was formed between long-separated human populations. The migration routes, therefore, were not neutral. They were channels of both creation and destruction, carrying the seeds of new societies in one direction and the agents of their potential unraveling in another. This reminds us that the story of human connection is never a simple tale of progress, but a complex balance where every new road opened carries with it an inherent and often hidden cost. Stone and earth remember what words forget. Scattered across the globe are structures of such scale and ambition that they seem to speak a silent, common language. From the stepped platforms of Mesopotamia to the great mounds along the Mississippi, these monuments are not just feats of engineering. They are frozen thoughts, physical manifestations of a culture's deepest beliefs about the cosmos, power, and memory. When we see similar forms arise in worlds apart, it forces a compelling question. Are we looking at independent inventions of the human mind, or the faint, lasting imprint of ideas that traveled unimaginable distances? Take the ziggurat, the iconic temple tower of ancient Mesopotamia. It was not a tomb, but a holy mountain built by human hands, a stairway meant to bridge the realm of the gods with the world of people. Its form, a series of receding terraces leading to a summit shrine, created a deliberate pathway for ritual ascent. Now, shift your gaze across the ocean and centuries to the great earthen mounds of North America's Mississippian culture, like the magnificent Monk's Mound at Cahokia. This too is a massive, flat-topped platform, built in stages with a ceremonial structure likely at its summit. The builders of Cahokia were not replicating a ziggurat they had never seen. They were solving a similar spiritual and social equation: how to create a sacred center that elevated leaders and rituals closer to the sky, while dominating the physical and symbolic landscape of their community. This is the phenomenon of convergent cultural evolution. When human societies reach a certain level of social complexity, with centralized leadership and a priestly class, they often feel compelled to alter their landscape in monumental ways. Piling earth or stone into a high place is a logical, powerful expression of that impulse. The form arises not from copying, but from a shared human logic, the need to make the intangible tangible. Yet, there are other architectural puzzles where the thread of connection seems more tangible, though infinitely delicate. Consider the megalithic temples of Malta, like Hagar Kim. Built over 5,000 years ago from colossal limestone blocks, these are among the oldest free-standing stone structures on Earth, predating the pyramids of Egypt. Their design often includes a distinctive cloverleaf layout of semicircular chambers. Intriguingly, a very similar architectural concept appears in the later Nuraghi of Sardinia, and echoes of it can even be traced to the mysterious talayots of the Balearic Islands. These cultures were seafarers of the Mediterranean. The distances between them were vast for the time, but not insurmountable over generations. Here, we might be seeing the slow diffusion of a formative influence, not a blueprint, but a powerful idea, the concept of a sacred space defined by massive stone and a specific ritual shape. This idea could have traveled by word of mouth, carried by traders, itinerant artisans, or even storytelling, inspiring local builders to create their own versions with locally available materials and their own stylistic flourishes. It is less like a direct copy and more like a game of architectural telephone played across centuries. The most profound evidence of connection, however, may lie in celestial alignment. This is where architecture transcends form and touches on a shared body of knowledge. The Great Pyramid of Giza is precisely aligned to the cardinal directions. The sun dagger at the Fajada Butte in Choco Canyon, New Mexico, marks the solstices with a blade of light. Stonehenge frames the sunrise on the summer solstice. These cultures, separated by continents and millennia, all invested immense labor to lock their stones into a dialogue with the sun, moon, and stars. This suggests that a certain level of astronomical understanding, the observed knowledge of solar and lunar cycles, was not just a local discovery, but a type of intellectual cargo that was incredibly valuable and portable. A migrating group or a traveling scholar could carry the knowledge of the 18.6-year lunar cycle or the solar standstill without carrying a single stone. That knowledge, when planted in a new land, could then inspire a completely original monument designed to harness those same celestial rhythms. So, are these monumental echoes proof of direct contact? Rarely, but they are proof of something equally profound: the connectivity of the human imagination. Whether through independent convergence, the slow seep of a formative idea, or the transfer of pure astronomical data, these stone witnesses tell us that the ancient mind was always reaching, always building bridges not just of stone but of thought. They remind us that an idea, once conceived, has a stubborn tendency to travel, seeking new minds and new landscapes in which to take root and rise once more toward the heavens. A story can be a map written in memory, Across the world, the oldest myths and legends we tell are not just fanciful tales. They are often the deepest archives of a people's past, preserving fragmented echoes of real journeys, lost homelands, and encounters with unfamiliar lands. These narratives offer us a poetic lens, a way to understand how ancient civilizations made sense of their own incredible origins and the vast movements that shaped them. Consider the intricate songlines of Aboriginal Australian cultures. These are not simply stories, but sacred maps of the landscape, detailing the paths taken by ancestral beings during the Dreamtime. Each feature of the land, a waterhole, a mountain, a rock formation, is linked to a specific event in the song. To sing the songline is to navigate the territory, to literally walk the path of the ancestors. Scholars see in these intricate oral maps a potential preservation of actual migration routes taken tens of thousands of years ago, as the first peoples moved across the Australian continent, encoding their journey into a living, sung geography that guided generations. Far across the world in the cold north, the Norse sagas tell of a different kind of journey, one of exploration rather than genesis. The tales of Vinland, a fertile land far to the west preserved in the Icelandic sagas, were long considered heroic fiction. Then, in the 1960s, archaeologists uncovered the remains of a Norse settlement at Elance Ox Meadows in Newfoundland, proving the stories were based on real, daring voyages across the North Atlantic. The saga was not a precise historical document, but it held a kernel of truth, a cultural memory of contact with a new world, complete with descriptions of its resources and inhabitants, passed down through generations around the fire. Perhaps the most widespread myth of all is the story of a great flood. We find it in the Mesopotamian epic of Gilgamesh, in the biblical story of Noah, in Hindu texts, and in the legends of indigenous peoples from the Americas to the Pacific Islands. The sheer universality of this theme is striking. While it is unlikely a single global deluge occurred, many researchers suggest these stories could be distant, collective memories of very real and catastrophic local events at the end of the last ice age. As glaciers melted and sea levels rose hundreds of feet over centuries, coastlines vanished, islands were swallowed, and fertile plains were inundated. For the communities living through this slow-motion catastrophe, it would have felt like the entire world was drowning. The trauma of losing homelands to the rising waters could have been woven into a powerful, cautionary myth that traveled with migrating survivors, adapting to new landscapes but retaining its core message of a world cleansed by water. On an even grander narrative scale, some scholars read epic poems as allegories for population movements. The Epic of Gilgamesh, for instance, follows the king of Uruk on a quest for immortality, a journey that takes him to the ends of the known world, through cedar forests and across the waters of death. Could this also reflect the trading expeditions and diplomatic journeys of early Mesopotamian city-states, venturing into the unfamiliar highlands of Lebanon or across the Persian Gulf? The story encodes the wonder, danger, and ultimate limits of expanding one's horizon. Similarly, the biblical Exodus, the story of a people led out of bondage in Egypt toward a promised land, resonates powerfully as a narrative of mass migration, identity formation, and the trials of a long journey through a harsh wilderness. Whether it records a specific historical event or synthesizes the experiences of many smaller group movements, it functions as a foundational memory of becoming a people through travel. These myths are not history books, and to treat them as such misses their profound purpose. They are the way a culture processes its past, transforming the raw, often chaotic events of migration, conflict, and environmental change into a meaningful story about who they are and where they came from. They provide identity, moral instruction, and a sense of place in a vast and mysterious world. When we listen to these ancient stories today, we are not just hearing fairy tales. We are overhearing the whispered conversations of our ancestors, trying to explain the footprints that led them to the place they called home, reminding us that every civilization begins with a journey, and every journey eventually becomes a story told under the stars. Every bridge, no matter how strong, can eventually fall. The great networks we have traced, those shimmering webs of exchange that linked continents, were not eternal. They were living systems, and like all living things, they had a lifespan. They rose, flourished for centuries, and then, often, they faded into silence. To understand the true nature of these ancient connections, we must also understand their endings. Why did these vital routes sometimes vanish, leaving civilizations once again in isolation? The reasons are as complex as the networks themselves, a tapestry of environmental shifts, political upheavals, and the simple exhaustion of the very resources that made the journey worthwhile. Climatic change was often the most decisive and indifferent force. A prolonged drought could transform a thriving oasis into a barren waste, snapping a critical link in a chain that spanned a desert. We saw this with the cyclical greening and drying of the Sahara, which acted like a door swinging open and shut between Africa's regions, but the impact could be even more direct. Consider the mighty Indus Valley civilization, that sophisticated partner to distant Mesopotamia. For centuries, their merchants sailed to Dilmun, and their seals ended up in Sumerian cities. Then the trade references cease. The great cities of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro were gradually abandoned. While the reasons are still debated, a strong thread of evidence points to a profound and lasting shift in the region's river systems. The life-giving waters of the Indus and its tributaries, which sustained the agriculture that fed the cities and powered the economy, may have changed course or dwindled due to climatic shifts. Without that agricultural surplus, the urban centers could not sustain their populations or their specialized craftspeople, including the artisans who made the carnelian beads and carved the seals for export. The civilization did not vanish overnight, but it transformed, becoming more localized and rural. The long-distance network with Mesopotamia, which depended on a steady flow of luxury goods from a stable, productive source, simply withered away. The route didn't close because of war, but because one end of the conversation slowly went quiet. Political fragmentation could be just as destructive as a changing climate. A trade route is not just a path, it is a chain of security and hospitality. It requires that the communities along its length, from nomadic tribes to settled kingdoms, agree, either through mutual benefit or enforced peace, to allow safe passage. When a powerful empire that policed a route collapsed, or when new, hostile groups rose to control the intermediary points, the chain could be broken. Imagine a caravan setting out from the Mediterranean coast into the Sahara. Its success depended on knowing where the wells were and on having agreements with the desert tribes who controlled them. If those tribes were displaced by a new group that saw the caravans not as partners but as targets for raiding, the journey became a lethal gamble. The flow of gold and salt would slow to a trickle, and the connection between continents would fray. Similarly, the stability of the Han and Roman empires at either end of the Silk Road created a golden age of exchange. When those empires faced internal crises and could no longer project power to secure the distant passes and oases, the route became perilous. Local warlords or nomadic confederations could charge exorbitant tolls or simply plunder the caravans, making the risk outweigh the reward. The knowledge of the route never disappeared, but the political will and security required to use it reliably often did. Sometimes the network collapsed because its very success sowed the seeds of its own decline. The relentless demand for a key resource could lead to its exhaustion. The trade in luxury goods like ivory or specific rare woods relied on a finite supply. If the resource was harvested faster than it could regenerate, the trade would eventually collapse. More subtly, a route could be made obsolete by innovation or a shift in economic currents. The discovery of a new source of a prized material closer to home, or the development of a cheaper substitute, could render a 1,000-mile journey suddenly pointless. Why brave the dangers of the steppe highway for a particular type of gemstone if a similar stone was found in a nearby mountain range? Economic gravity would pull trade onto shorter, safer, more profitable paths, leaving the old intercontinental artery to be reclaimed by the grass and the sand. These endings remind us that these networks were not monuments. They were practical economic entities, and they lived and died by a simple calculus of cost, risk, and reward. Their fragility is a lesson in the precariousness of connection, showing us that the threads that bind civilizations together require constant care, stable climates, peaceful corridors, and a reason to make the journey, or they will, in time, simply blow away. The vanished highways of our ancestors left no asphalt or road signs. To find them, modern science has become a kind of time-traveling detective, using tools that peer through soil, forest, and even centuries of silence. The quest begins not with a shovel, but with a view from space, satellite imagery, and a technology called LIDAR, which stands for light detection and ranging, have revolutionized our ability to see the unseen. From orbit, satellites equipped with special sensors can detect subtle variations in soil moisture and plant health. A buried stone wall or a field in irrigation ditch will affect how plants grow above it, creating faint lines and patterns in a field of crops, invisible to the human eye on the ground but starkly clear from hundreds of miles up. These are called crop marks, and they can outline the ghost of a forgotten settlement or a long-vanished road. LIDAR takes this vision to another level. Mounted on a plane or drone, it fires millions of laser pulses at the ground. By measuring how long each pulse takes to bounce back, it creates an exquisitely detailed three-dimensional map of the surface, digitally stripping away layers of vegetation. In the dense jungles of Mesoamerica, LIDAR has revealed vast, sprawling Maya cities with networks of raised causeways, completely hidden under the canopy. In the forests of Europe, it has uncovered ancient Celtic processional ways and Roman roads lost for millennia. These technologies allow archaeologists to map entire landscapes of movement without turning a single spade of earth, revealing the grand architecture of ancient travel. But what about the travelers themselves? Here, the science becomes deeply personal. Take a single tooth from an ancient burial site. Within its enamel, locked in a chemical signature, is a story of a person's earliest years. Scientists use a process called isotope analysis. The food and water we consume as children contain specific isotopic ratios of elements like strontium and oxygen, which vary uniquely from one geological region to another. These signatures become permanently incorporated into our growing teeth. By analyzing a tooth from an individual, researchers can compare its isotopic fingerprint to maps of regional geology. The result can be astonishingly precise, telling us that a person buried in a great city like ancient Rome likely spent their childhood hundreds of miles away, perhaps in North Africa or the Danube region. This turns abstract migration into an individual biography, proving that people were moving across continents as part of their life story. To trace the movement of objects, archaeologists turn to material science. Obsidian, the volcanic glass prized by ancient peoples for its razor-sharp edges, acts like a natural barcode. Each volcanic flow has a unique chemical composition. By taking a tiny sample from an obsidian tool found far from any volcano and analyzing its elemental makeup, scientists can match it to its exact source, sometimes a specific mountain peak thousands of miles away. Mapping the find spots of tools from that single source creates a vivid picture of a trade network, showing how this valuable material flowed along rivers, over mountain passes, and across seas. It charts the economic geography of the ancient world, For the most daring voyages across the trackless Pacific, researchers employed digital simulation. Using sophisticated oceanographic models that account for historical wind patterns, ocean currents, and stellar navigation points, they can simulate thousands of virtual voyages in ancient-style canoes. These experiments don't prove a specific journey happened, but they reveal what was possible. They show the most likely routes and seasonal windows, the places where a drifting vessel would end up, and how long such a trip might take. It turns the epic poems of the Polynesian navigators into a testable hypothesis, blending traditional knowledge with cutting-edge computational science. This is the quiet revolution in understanding our past. It is no longer just about the artifact in the glass case, but about the invisible journey it represents. By combining satellite eyes, chemical signatures, material fingerprints, and digital winds, we are slowly, painstakingly, redrawing the map of human connection. Each data point is a pixel in a recovering image, showing us that the footprints of our ancestors, though faded, were never truly lost. The sharpest tool in the ancient world traveled farther than we might ever walk. Obsidian, that volcanic glass that fractures into edges sharper than modern surgical steel, was one of humanity's first truly global commodities. Long before caravans carried silk or ships were laden with spices, this simple, functional stone was being passed from hand to hand across staggering distances, creating a hidden web of economic connection that linked continents. Each flake of obsidian found far from its source is a silent witness to a conversation between distant peoples, a receipt for a transaction written in stone. The story begins at the volcano's mouth. Obsidian forms only in specific, geologically active regions. In the ancient Near East, two sources became legendary. One was in central Anatolia, in modern Turkey, at a place now called Siflik. The other was on the island of Milos in the Aegean Sea. From these quarries, the glossy black stone was mined and shaped into cores, the raw material for countless blades, arrowheads, and scrapers. But how do we know where a piece of obsidian ended up? Here, science provides a perfect fingerprint. Using a technique called X-ray fluorescence, archaeologists can analyze the unique chemical signature of a stone tool. Every volcanic flow has a distinct blend of trace elements, like a geological DNA. By matching an artifact to its source, researchers can plot its journey on a map with astonishing precision. The results are breathtaking. Tools made from Anatolian obsidian have been found in archaeological sites hundreds of miles to the south, in the early villages and cities of the Levant and Mesopotamia. Even more remarkably, obsidian from Ethiopia has been discovered in sites across the Red Sea in Yemen, and from there, evidence suggests it moved inland along the Arabian Peninsula. These are not short hops. We are talking about journeys of over 1,000 miles across mountain ranges, deserts, and bodies of water. This was not a single merchant undertaking an epic trek. Instead, it almost certainly operated as a down-the-line trade network. Imagine a village near the obsidian source. They would trade some of their plentiful stone with a neighboring community further out, perhaps for shells or a special type of flint. That second community would then trade some of that obsidian, now more valuable because it is rarer here, with a third group even farther away. The commodity moves in a series of small, local exchanges, each handshake adding a little to its value and its story. Over generations, this slow, incremental process could move a prized material across a continent, with no single person understanding the full length of the chain that brought it to them. This system reveals a profound early truth about human economics. Value is created by scarcity and function. For a farming community days away from the nearest volcano, a single core of obsidian represented months of reliable, razor-sharp tools for harvesting, butchering, and crafting. It was worth giving up something precious in return. The network was not built by kings or empires, but by countless individual decisions, by the universal human desire for a better, more efficient tool. It required no treaties, only a mutual understanding of benefit and a basic level of trust between neighboring groups. The Obsidian trade is the physical evidence of that trust, a durable record of peaceful exchange that predates written history. It shows us that the roots of globalization are not in boardrooms, but in the simple, practical need for a good cutting edge, and the willingness to reach out, even indirectly, to the distant stranger who had it. In these black glass blades, we see the first faint pulse of a connected world economy, beating long before the idea of a continent was ever drawn on a map. Their ships were the whisper of civilization on the open sea. While empires rose and fell on land, a different kind of power was being built along the cedar-lined coasts of the Levant. The Phoenicians, a people from the narrow strip of land that is modern-day Lebanon, never sought to conquer vast territories. Instead, they conquered distance itself, becoming the master weavers of the Mediterranean world. Their story is not one of sprawling kingdoms, but of a network so resilient and far-reaching that its influence shaped the destiny of continents. They looked at the endless blue horizon and saw not a barrier, but a marketplace, a highway, and a home. What drove this maritime obsession? The answer lies in their geography and their genius. Sandwiched between the mountains and the sea with limited farmland, their prosperity depended on what they could make and trade. They possessed two priceless resources: vast forests of magnificent cedar wood, perfect for shipbuilding, and a deep understanding of how to extract a vibrant purple dye from a local sea snail. This dye, so rare and color-fast it became the mark of royalty from Egypt to Rome, was their first ticket to economic independence, but to trade it, they needed ships that could carry it safely across treacherous waters. This necessity sparked an era of breathtaking innovation. Phoenician shipwrights designed two revolutionary vessels. The Golos was a rounded, capacious merchant ship, a floating warehouse built to carry tons of grain, wine, or timber. The Beringia was a sleek, fast warship powered by two banks of oars, designed to protect those precious cargoes from pirates and to secure new trading posts. With these tools, they set out to map the unknown. Their method was systematic and bold. Instead of sending lone explorers, they established permanent colonies, self-sufficient communities planted on distant shores like seeds. From their great city-states of Tyre, Sidon, and Byblos, they sailed west. They settled on Cyprus, then Sicily and Sardinia. They pushed further, founding the mighty city of Carthage on the North African coast, which would grow to rival Rome itself. Their most daring settlements were beyond the Pillars of Hercules, what we call the Strait of Gibraltar, on the Atlantic coasts of Spain and Portugal. Here, at places like Gadir, modern Cadiz, they accessed the legendary silver mines of Tartessos and established a direct trade for British tin. Each colony was not an end point, but a new node, a fresh harbor from which the next voyage could begin. Their navigation was an art form passed from father to son. Without compasses, they sailed by the stars, particularly tracking the North Star. They kept detailed periply, sailing manuals that described coastlines, landmarks, currents, and safe anchorages. These were state secrets, closely guarded because knowledge of a route was the source of their monopoly. The most astonishing account of their skill comes not from a Phoenician source, but from a Greek historian. Herodotus records that around 600 years before the Common Era, the Egyptian pharaoh Necho II commissioned a Phoenician crew to attempt a feat that seemed impossible: to sail clockwise around the entire continent of Africa. According to the tale, they set out from the Red Sea, sailed south, and after many months witnessed the sun on their right hand, to the north, a detail that would only make sense if they had crossed the equator and were rounding the southern tip of Africa. They reportedly returned to Egypt through the Mediterranean after 3 years, having stopped each autumn to sow and harvest grain to sustain themselves. Most historians view this story with caution, a mix of possible truth and later embellishment. Whether they completed the full circuit or not, the very fact that such a voyage was plausible to ancient writers speaks volumes about the reputation of Phoenician seamanship. It was this reputation that fuels the most tantalizing speculation of all, the idea that Phoenician or Carthaginian vessels, blown off course or driven by exploratory zeal, might have reached the Americas long before the Vikings or Columbus. Proponents point to alleged Phoenician inscriptions on stones in Brazil and mysterious cultural parallels, but mainstream archaeology remains deeply skeptical. No verified Phoenician artifact has ever been found in the Americas, and the inscriptions are widely considered to be modern forgeries or natural rock formations. The ocean currents and prevailing winds of the North Atlantic make an accidental crossing from Iberia to the Caribbean exceedingly unlikely for their ships, which were designed for coastal hopping and island sighting, not for surviving the open ocean for weeks on end. While the human spirit loves a mystery, the verified truth of their reach is astounding enough. They were the essential middlemen, the distributors of civilization's toolkit. They carried the alphabet, that revolutionary simplification of writing, from the Near East to Greece, where it was adapted and spread. They transported the artistic styles of Egypt and Mesopotamia to the tribal cultures of the Western Mediterranean, influencing local art and religion. They moved not just goods but technologies, from advanced glassmaking to improved methods of olive oil production. The Mediterranean was not a moat separating cultures, it was a Phoenician lake, a connective tissue they themselves created. Their legacy is not in ruined palaces but in the very concept of a maritime trading network. They proved that power could be fluid, based on knowledge, mobility, and commercial acumen rather than the size of an army. When their homeland was eventually absorbed by successive empires, their colonies, especially Carthage, carried the torch. And when Rome finally burned Carthage to the ground, it was not just a city they sought to erase, but the memory of a rival who had mastered the sea. Yet that mastery had already left an indelible mark, weaving the shores of 3 continents into a single, intricate web of exchange that would define the classical world. The most reliable witnesses to ancient journeys are often grazing in a field. Human migrants never traveled alone. They brought with them an entire living world, a portable economy of plants and animals that transformed every landscape they touched. The spread of these domesticated species creates a biological map of human movement, a trail of ecological breadcrumbs that leads us directly to the footsteps of our ancestors. When we trace the journey of a single seed or a particular breed of animal, we are not just following a plant or a beast. We are tracing the migration of the human mind, the deliberate choice to carry a piece of home into the unknown. Consider the humble grains of wheat and barley. Their wild ancestors grew in a narrow arc of land known as the Fertile Crescent. Around 10,000 years ago, people there began the slow, patient process of domestication, selecting seeds from plants that held their grain longer or grew more abundantly. This was a revolution in a stalk, the birth of agriculture, but the story did not end in those first fields. As farming communities grew, some members would eventually move on, seeking new land. They did not leave their hard-won knowledge behind. They packed the most vital part of it, bags of seed grain. We can follow their progress archaeologically, as the evidence of cultivated wheat and barley appears further and further from its origin, like a slow wave spreading northwest into Europe and east toward the Indus Valley. Each new field was a statement of identity and intention. It meant these travelers were not just passing through, they were putting down roots literally. They were committing to a sedentary, agricultural future, and they were bringing the very foundation of that future with them in their sacks. This biological expansion reshaped continents. The forests of Europe were gradually cleared to make way for amber waves of grain. a transformation of the ecosystem as profound as any caused by climate. Diets changed, social structures evolved around harvest cycles, and the population could grow in ways never before possible. The grain was more than food, it was a civilization starter kit. On the other side of the world, a different creature was beginning its own global trek. The humble chicken, originally domesticated from the red jungle fowl in Southeast Asia, became one of history's great travelers. Its journey is a multi-stage epic that mirrors human exploration and trade. From its homeland, the chicken moved west, likely carried along the early trade routes that connected Southeast Asia to India and the Middle East. It appears in the Indus Valley and later in ancient Egypt, where it was initially a rare and exotic bird, valued more for ritual or sport than for its eggs. From the Mediterranean, Phoenician and Greek traders carried it across Europe, but its most astonishing voyage was yet to come. We have already touched on the tantalizing evidence that Polynesian voyagers, the descendants of the Lapita, may have reached South America. The chicken sits at the heart of this mystery. Genetic studies suggest that chickens in the Pacific and in parts of South America share a deep ancestral link, distinct from European breeds. While the evidence is complex and debated, it points to the possibility that these fearless navigators carried the chicken in their canoes across the Pacific. If so, the bird completed a circumnavigation of the globe long before any human explorer did, hitching a ride on two separate, monumental waves of human migration, one from Asia west and another from Asia east across the ocean. The chicken's value was its versatility, a compact source of protein that could forage for itself and thrive in a variety of climates, making it the perfect traveling companion for a species on the move. In the isolated world of the Andes, another story of animal partnership unfolded, one of supreme adaptation to a vertical landscape. Here, the ancestors of the Inca did not have horses or cattle. Their great domesticated companions were the llama and the alpaca, camelids uniquely suited to the high altitude. Their domestication was a triumph of Andean ingenuity, creating animals that provided wool, meat, and crucially, the ability to carry loads across treacherous mountain passes. The spread of llama and alpaca herding throughout the Andes is a map of cultural and economic integration in this rugged region. Control of the herds meant control of the trade routes, the ability to move goods like salt, maize, and coca leaves between ecological zones from the coast to the high plains. The animals made the mountains navigable, linking communities that would have otherwise remained isolated in their valleys. They were the living engines of the Andean economy, and their presence at an archaeological site is a sure sign of connection to the broader highland world. These biological travelers, from wheat to chickens to llamas, tell a story deeper than trade. They represent a fundamental shift in the human relationship with nature, from simply taking what was available to carefully shaping it, and then carrying that shaped world along on every journey. When a group migrated, they were not just looking for a new home that resembled the old one, they were bringing the key components to build it from scratch. The success of their voyage was measured not just by their safe arrival, but by whether their seeds sprouted in the new soil and their animals thrived in the new pastures. This biological legacy is the most tangible one we have inherited. The food on our plates, from a loaf of bread to a roast chicken, is the direct descendant of those ancient, intentional journeys. It reminds us that civilization is not just about cities and kings, but about the deep, enduring partnerships we formed with other species, partnerships that walked, sailed, and grew alongside us to populate a world. A civilization is not an island, even when surrounded by sea. We often study ancient empires as self-contained worlds, rising and falling in splendid isolation. But what if we changed the lens entirely? What if we saw them not as separate stars, but as constellations, each one defined by its relationship to the others in a shared system of light and gravity? This is the provocative idea behind applying the concept of a world system to antiquity. The term was famously developed by the scholar Immanuel Wallerstein to describe the modern global economy, with powerful core nations, developing semi-peripheral regions, and resource-extracting peripheries all locked in a cycle of exchange and dependency. At first glance, this seems like a purely modern framework dependent on capitalism, colonialism, and rapid communication. Yet, when we look at the intricate dance of the late Bronze Age Eastern Mediterranean, from roughly 1600 to 1200 years before the Common Era, the pattern feels hauntingly familiar. Here was a dense network of interaction, a true international age. At its core were the great kingdoms, Egypt under its pharaohs, the Hittite Empire in Anatolia, and the palace states of Mycenaean Greece. These were not neighbors who merely knew of each other. They were deeply engaged in a continuous dialogue of diplomacy, trade, and occasional conflict. They exchanged letters on clay tablets in a shared diplomatic language, Akkadian. They sent lavish gifts, what they called greeting goods, which were in fact a formalized system of elite exchange, moving gold, ivory, chariots, and skilled artisans between courts. A pharaoh might write to a Hittite king addressing him as "my brother," a term of political parity, while negotiating the terms for a royal marriage or the shipment of vital grain during a famine. The palaces of Mycenae and Pylos kept meticulous linear B records of textiles, perfumed oil, and bronze, commodities produced for this very international market. Surrounding these powerful cores were the semi-peripheral players, regions like the island of Cyprus, known then as Alashia. Cyprus was not a military superpower, but it held a resource so crucial it gave the island outsized importance: copper. This metal, alloyed with tin from even more distant sources, was the lifeblood of the age, the essential ingredient for bronze weapons, tools, and prestige items. Cyprus acted as a critical processor and distributor, deeply integrated into the system but not directing its overall politics. Then, on the peripheries, were regions that supplied raw materials or labor, often through less formal or more coercive means. The forests of Lebanon supplied the cedar wood craved by timber-poor Egypt. Distant Anatolia or beyond provided the tin. The system operated on a slower, more personal scale than today's stock markets, but the principles of interdependence were strikingly similar. A drought in the Hittite heartland could trigger a desperate plea for Egyptian grain, altering diplomatic power balances. The collapse of a tin trade route could cause economic stress from Mesopotamia to the Aegean, as the vital alloy became scarce and expensive. This was not a global system in the literal sense, but it was a world system from the perspective of those within it, encompassing their entire known universe of complex interaction. Viewing antiquity through this lens fundamentally changes the story. The famed Sea Peoples, who are often blamed for the Bronze Age collapse around 1200 BCE, are no longer just a mysterious invading horde. In this framework, they can be seen as a symptom of a systemic failure. If the interconnected network was stressed by climate change, harvest failures, and internal rebellions, the disruption of trade and diplomacy could have caused a chain reaction. The semi-peripheral and peripheral regions, perhaps displaced or seeking new opportunities, might have moved against the weakened cores, not as a coordinated army, but as a wave of consequences from a system breaking down. This perspective encourages us to see the ancient world not as a collection of isolated lanterns, each flickering out alone, but as a fragile web of lights where the dimming of one could plunge many into darkness. It suggests that the roots of our interconnected destiny are far older than we think, woven not with fiber optic cables, but with the cargo of cedar ships and the sealed clay tablets of royal messengers. The map of progress was never drawn with a single compass. For generations, the story of human advancement was told with a distinct directional bias, a quiet assumption that the great river of innovation flowed in one primary current, from the classical civilizations of the Mediterranean north and west outward to enlighten the rest of the world. This Eurocentric lens not only distorts history, it erases the brilliance of entire continents, turning them into passive recipients rather than dynamic contributors. To truly understand the migration of ideas, we must shatter this one-way mirror and look in every direction. The evidence is overwhelming that influence, technology, and profound insight pulsed along the ancient networks in all directions, from south to north, from east to west, creating a true conversation of continents. Let's begin in a place often relegated to the very beginning of the human story, but curiously absent from later chapters of innovation: Africa. The narrative of ancient Egypt is frequently siloed, treated as a magnificent but isolated phenomenon, somehow separate from the rest of the African continent. This is a profound geographical and cultural error. Egypt was not an island of genius in a vacuum. It was part of a vast African world. Long before the pyramids rose, there was vibrant cultural exchange along the Nile corridor, stretching deep into the heart of the continent. The Kingdom of Kush, in what is now Sudan, was not a mere copycat of its northern neighbor. For a time, Kushite pharaohs actually ruled Egypt in the 25th dynasty. They brought with them distinct artistic styles, architectural forms like the steep-sided Nubian pyramid, and their own powerful traditions of kingship. The flow of ideas here was a two-way street, with Egypt influencing Kush and Kush profoundly shaping a period of Egyptian history. Looking further west, the Garamontes of the Sahara, with their sophisticated underground irrigation, demonstrate an engineering brilliance born of adapting to an extreme environment, a knowledge system developed independently of Mediterranean models. Even the very foundations of mathematics bear traces of this southern influence. Some historians note that the concepts later refined by Greek thinkers may have roots in earlier Egyptian and Mesopotamian systems, which themselves were connected to a wider Afro-Asiatic sphere of intellectual development. This isn't about claiming one culture invented everything, but about recognizing a web, not a ladder. Now cross the Atlantic to a world that developed in breathtaking isolation. The civilizations of Mesoamerica, completely cut off from the wheel, iron, or draft animals of the Old World, achieved intellectual heights that force us to expand our definition of advancement. Take the Maya, whose understanding of time and the cosmos was encoded in a mathematics of stunning elegance. While Europe languished in the early Middle Ages, Maya astronomers were calculating the solar year to a more precise degree than the Gregorian calendar we use today. They developed the concept of zero as a placeholder, a conceptual leap that would not appear in Europe for centuries. Their long count calendar tracked time over spans of thousands of years with a cyclical, profound philosophy utterly alien to the linear timeline of the West. This was not a primitive counting system. It was a sophisticated intellectual tool for modeling the universe, born from intense observation and philosophical inquiry. Similarly, the city of Teotihuacan, with its vast urban planning aligned to celestial events, and the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan, a marvel of hydraulic engineering built on a lake, stand as testaments to organizational and architectural genius that followed its own unique logic. To view these achievements through a Eurocentric lens is to miss the point entirely. They are not failed attempts to be Rome or Athens. They are parallel expressions of human ingenuity, solving the problems of society, time, and space with a different but equally valid set of answers. Finally, look to the greatest ocean, where the ultimate challenge of connection was not land but endless water. The Austronesian peoples, whose linguistic trail we followed from Taiwan to the Pacific, were not just travelers, they were the master engineers of the pre-modern world. Their maritime technology was centuries, if not millennia, ahead of anything in contemporary Europe. The outrigger canoe and the double-hulled voyaging canoe were not simple boats. they were stable, seaworthy vessels capable of navigating the open ocean for weeks. Their navigational science was a complex fusion of art and empirical knowledge, reading wave patterns, bird behavior, and star paths with a precision that allowed them to colonize the last habitable corners of the planet. Compare this to the Mediterranean world, where sailors largely clung to coastlines, terrified of losing sight of land. The Polynesian expansion represents the pinnacle of human adaptation to the marine environment, a technological package that moved from east to west across the Pacific, with no input from or influence upon the classical world until very late in history. Their contribution to the shared pool of human knowledge was the very mastery of the sea itself. Deconstructing the directional bias is not an exercise in political correctness. It is a necessity for historical accuracy. When we assume a west-to-east flow of ideas, we unconsciously cast entire hemispheres in the role of perpetual students, waiting for the spark of enlightenment to arrive from elsewhere. This ignores the simple, observable fact that human curiosity and problem-solving are universal traits. Innovation sparks wherever people face challenges, whether those challenges are the desert sun, the dense jungle, the trackless ocean, or the complexities of urban life. The ancient networks we have traced were not pipelines delivering civilization from a single source. They were synaptic pathways in a global brain, firing in all directions. A mathematical concept might form in Mesopotamia, be refined in India, and later influence the Islamic world, which in turn passes it to Europe. A crop domesticated in the Andes finds its way across the Pacific to become a staple in Polynesia. The story is not one of a single torch being carried forward, but of countless lanterns being lit in different valleys, their light gradually merging to illuminate the whole. By embracing this multidirectional, holistic view, we do not diminish any one civilization. We celebrate the collective, interconnected genius of our species. We begin to see history not as a race with a single finish line, but as a symphony where every continent contributed its own essential voice to the music of human achievement. That restless urge to see what lies beyond the next hill is written into our bones. While other species found their ecological niche and stayed, our ancestors seemed perpetually dissatisfied, driven by a quiet internal whisper to move, to see, to know. This psychological engine, more than any tool or technology, is what propelled humanity across continents and oceans. To understand the migration routes that linked civilizations, we must first ask a more fundamental question about ourselves. Why are we like this? Evolutionary psychology offers fascinating clues, suggesting that our wanderlust is not a cultural accident, but a deep-seated survival strategy that became our greatest strength. In a world of limited resources and constant change, the individuals who are willing to take a calculated risk to venture beyond the familiar foraging grounds held a powerful advantage. They could discover new sources of food and water before a drought struck their home territory. They could find safer shelter or identify potential threats from rival groups. This behavior, a constant scanning of the horizon for opportunity and danger, is a form of long-term information gathering. The ones who stayed safely within known boundaries might survive today, but the ones who explored secured the future for their descendants. This created a powerful selective pressure over millennia. Groups with a higher proportion of curious, adaptable risk-takers were more resilient, more likely to survive environmental shocks and population pressures. Their genes and their exploratory mindset spread. This isn't about a single explorer gene, but a complex interplay of traits, a heightened tolerance for uncertainty, a dopamine-driven reward system that finds novelty itself satisfying, and a social intelligence that allows us to cooperate on long, dangerous journeys. Think of it as a cognitive toolkit for dealing with the unknown. Social competition adds another compelling layer to this drive. In close-knit communities, status and mating opportunities are fiercely contested. For a younger sibling with limited inheritance or an individual on the social periphery, striking out to establish a new group elsewhere could be a better path to leadership and reproductive success than fighting for position at home. Migration, in this light, is not just an escape from scarcity, but a pursuit of opportunity, a chance to rewrite one's social destiny. This dynamic would have propelled countless small groups to spin off from parent populations, seeding new communities over the next ridge or across the next river. Is this relentless curiosity a defining human trait? Compare us to our closest primate relatives. A chimpanzee troop has a fiercely defended territory, its boundaries learned and respected over generations. Straying outside is dangerous and rare. Humans, by contrast, seem to possess what researchers call the behavioral immune system turned down and curiosity turned up. We are uniquely willing to approach the unfamiliar, to taste the unknown plant, to wonder about the distant smoke from a fire. This innate drive is the spark that turned the slow dispersal of early hominids into the purposeful, planet-spanning voyages we have been tracing. It is the reason a band in Africa looked at the vast desert to the north and wondered what was on the other side, and the reason their descendants millennia later stood on a beach in Southeast Asia, looked at the empty horizon of the Pacific, and built a canoe to sail toward it. This psychological wiring explains the sheer relentlessness of the human story. We did not simply migrate when we had to, we explored because we could. The horizon was not a barrier, it was an invitation. Every new valley offered a potential home, but also a new mystery, a fresh set of mountains on the other side begging to be crossed. This deep-seated drive transformed geography from a prison into a network. It is the invisible compass that guided every step of the journeys we have mapped, from the steppe to the sea, making the human species not just a resident of the world, but its ultimate connector. The ghost maps of those ancient journeys are not just history, they are the hidden wiring of our modern world. Look at a map of Europe, and you will see the faint outline of the steppe highway in the distribution of languages. The reason someone in Lisbon and someone in Moscow can trace their speech back to a common ancestor is because of those mounted migrations 5,000 years ago. That linguistic legacy is a direct echo of hooves on grassland. Our dinner tables tell a similar story. The tomato, native to the Andes, now forms the base of Italian cuisine. Potatoes from the same region became a staple from Ireland to Russia. Coffee from Ethiopia fuels mornings across the globe. These are not accidents of modern trade, but the latest chapters in exchanges that began when the first traveler carried a seed or a seedling across a mountain pass, linking continents one meal at a time. Even our own bodies carry this map. The genetic diversity we see across regions, the subtle variations that tell a story of deep ancestry, are the living record of those epic migrations. The foundational populations of the Americas, all tracing back to those Beringian crossings, shape the demographic and cultural landscape of two continents to this day. This deep history is not a relic, it is an active force. Look at the Modern Belt and Road Initiative, a vast network of infrastructure spanning from China to Europe. While powered by high-speed rail and fiber optics, its geographic corridor consciously retraces the ancient Silk Road, acknowledging that the most efficient paths for connection were often mapped out by camel caravans 2,000 years ago. Political boundaries themselves often follow these old, invisible lines. Many modern borders in Africa and the Middle East were drawn by colonial powers with little regard for ethnic or cultural landscapes, yet they frequently fall along ancient ecological or trade frontiers, like the edge of a desert or a river that once divided spheres of influence. This enduring influence reveals a profound truth. What we call globalization is not an invention of the internet age or even the age of sail. It is a fundamental rhythm of the human story, a pattern set in motion when the first family group decided to walk beyond the horizon. Our world of instant communication and global supply chains is simply the latest, fastest iteration of a process that has been weaving humanity together for tens of thousands of years. Recognizing this continuity changes our perspective. It means the challenges and opportunities of connection are not new, they are ancient. It means the cultural blending we see in our cities, the fusion of ideas in our technology, and even the conflicts that arise from clashing worldviews are part of a long, complex conversation between continents that began on foot, on horseback, and in canoes. We are not creating a connected world, we are inheriting one and learning to live within its deep, enduring patterns. These ancient pathways were never truly lost. They simply became the foundation for everything that followed, the hidden blueprint of our modern world. Our journey along the migration routes that linked the first intercontinental civilizations reveals a profound and humbling truth. Humanity has always been connected. Long before satellites and shipping containers, a vast and intricate web was already being woven by steppe horsemen and Pacific navigators, by Saharan traders and Bronze Age merchants. They built a world far more intertwined and interdependent than our history books often lead us to believe. The evidence of their voyages is not buried in ruins alone. It lives on in the most intimate parts of our existence. It echoes in the words we speak, a linguistic map drawn by millennia of movement. It is written in the very code of our genes, a living family tree that spans continents. It resonates in the myths we tell and the foods we share, stories and flavors that crossed oceans when such a feat seemed impossible. This deep, shared history is our common inheritance. As we navigate a new era of global challenges, from environmental shifts to the complexities of a digital society, this long view offers a crucial perspective. It reminds us that our species' greatest strength has always been adaptability, our capacity to innovate in the face of the unknown, and our relentless drive to reach out and form connections, even across the most formidable divides. The story of these routes is not a tale of isolated genius, but of collective brilliance, a symphony of human curiosity played out across the entire planet. Let this exploration be a starting point for your own curiosity. We have left a trail of resources in the description for you to dive deeper into any route that captured your imagination. Tell us in the comments which journey fascinated you the most, the fearless Lapita Voyagers, the transformative steppe riders, or another path we walked together. And if you want to continue unraveling the great mysteries of our past, subscribe and join us for the next discovery. The map of human history is still being drawn, and every new thread we find reminds us of the incredible, interconnected story we all